the next panelist, who is someone who's really good at connecting, those big issues, and to show that all those struggles for tax justice, for gender equality, and also for climate inequality are interconnected. So he's assistant professor at Sciences Po Paris. He's also one of the co-directors of the World Inequality Lab and senior advisor to EU Tax Observatory. So I would like you to join me in giving a warm welcome to Lucas Chancel.
Thank you very much, Alice, and good afternoon, everybody. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. So the title of this talk is Global Wealth Inequality and Billionaire Taxation. And the starting point is, are we in a billionaire age? So this is the wealth of some of the richest individuals of all times. The average top 5 persons in Forbes own, on average, the equivalent of 2.5 million times the average income in the US. This is actually much higher than the equivalent wealth owned by Bill Gates, the richest man in the early 2000s, whose wealth was about 1 million times the average income in the US then. John D. Rockefeller, recognized by many, at least at the time, as the richest man of all times, his wealth was actually 1.5 times 1.5 million times the average income of his time. And if we look even further in the past, back in the past, borrowing data from Branko Milanovic and colleagues, Marcus Crassus, often seen as the richest private person in Rome, well, his wealth was 0.5 million times the average income in his times. Alan Rufus, very rich landowner in Britain in the 11th century, even lower than that. So is this a billionaire age? Well, when we look at the media, when we pay a little bit attention to public debates, billionaires are everywhere. So this is Forbes front page 2025. But one issue is that, well, in most public statistics, it's not so easy to see them. It's not so easy to see what is happening at the top of the wealth distribution. I'm saying this, and at the same time, it's important to recognize that there has been some progress over the past decade. So following the 2009 release of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission in the city, well, there has been progress. In the US, the distributional financial accounts were released by the Fed from 2019 onwards, and you can see the evolution of wealth inequality up to the top 1%. In France, thanks to the work of Jean-Marc Germain, Mathias André, and other colleagues at INSEE, who worked in partnership with many faces that I see here in this room, published the Comptes Nationaux Distribués, so an attempt to distribute national accounts in the context of France. The OECD has also produced a wealth distribution database from 2015 onwards, with revisions in 2018 and for later years. Yet, all this new available data produced by public statistics is still often disconnected from public policy discussions on wealth inequality. In particular, one maybe because of granularity issue. At best, we have data for the top 1%. Sometimes it stops at the top 10%, even in the top 20% in some countries. Timeliness. Often this data stopped several years ago based on some latest survey. Not necessarily for these first 2 cases, but in some countries that's what we observe. In fact, access to raw data on what's happening in terms of wealth dynamics at the very top has actually been made more difficult. That happens, for instance, when a wealth tax is scrapped or deeply modified in a country. It's harder for researchers to access good quality data at the very top. And if we take a global perspective, in fact, most countries do not have distributional wealth accounts at all. At the World Inequality Lab, over the past few years, we've looked at this issue quite a bit. We've published in partnership with the United Nations Development Program, this Wealth Transparency Index, which represents an idea of the data quality and the difficulty to access income and wealth inequality data over the world. You see that, some Scandinavian countries fare quite high on this indicator, but, for most of the world, it's quite a bad indicator. And it's not necessarily progressing across the world. So that was a short introduction to bring you to where I would like to go in this presentation. I'd like to say a few words on the World Inequality Database project and 2 decades tracking wealth inequality. Why I'm starting with this? Because I think that if billionaire wealth is an issue, if centimillionaire wealth is an issue, it's because we're able to connect what's happening at the very, very top of the distribution to what's happening at other segments of the distribution. And this, in fact, means that we need to have consistent, systematic distributional wealth accounts at all levels of the distribution with consistent macroeconomic, microeconomic estimates of wealth and income inequality. And so I'm going to say a few words on the underlying work that made this discussion as we're having it, or at least as I'm having it in this lecture, possible. Second, I'd like to present some of the latest findings related to global wealth inequality from the World Inequality Database. And then I will draw from this to present a tool which we're happy to and quite excited to release on the occasion of this conference, which is a global wealth tax simulator tool, and which is available for all countries in the world now, thanks to this revision or revised version of this simulator that we're launching today. And I will end, hopefully if I have time, with a few reflections on billionaire taxation. So tracking wealth and income inequality, well, the starting point in the 50s, 70s, the work of Simon Kuznets, of Tony Atkinson, of Alan Harrison, combining national tax data, national accounts data with tax data to present systematic, long-run estimates of income or wealth inequality. There were few researchers at the time doing that. At the turn of the 21st century, there's a renewed perspective on the matter. Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez, Facundo Alvarado, Tony Atkinson still join forces and create the premises of the World Inequality Database project with the publication of long-run top income shares. In the mid-2000s, the focus is not just on top incomes anymore, it's also on top wealth inequality. It's not just on the top of the distribution, it's also on other segments on the distribution, so focusing on the full support of the distribution. Focus also becomes really working on consistency between the distribution and the macro aggregates. I'm thinking here of the seminal work by Thomas and Gabriel, 2014. Tax evasion also becomes a focus, and dozens of researchers actually join this project. Today, over 200 researchers on all continents contribute or have contributed to the data that I'm going to discuss in a minute. And over the past few years, a large emphasis has been put on wealth inequality in the global south, which really helps when we want to have a global perspective on wealth inequality, plus a much stronger emphasis on tax policy responses. And the European Tax Observatory has an agenda very much of its own, and at the same time is also a continuation of this long-term project tracking income and wealth inequality over the world. And if this is the case right now, I will have a big issue in the rest of this presentation. So I will just skip it and cross my fingers that it's the only slide that has this problem. What the previous slide was showing is that standard survey data misses a big part of capital income sources. So if we just rely on household surveys, we miss a big part of capital incomes, which are so key to understand the dynamics of income inequality and wealth inequality at the top of the distribution. And then this slide, which is working, what this slide shows is that the issue of the missing rich in standard inequality sources is not just a problem for inequality data geeks. It can have strong impacts on how we read the evolution of the economy at a certain point of time. So what you see here is the evolution of top 10% income share in Brazil according to survey data in green, which shows a reduction in inequality, which really essentially talked about the reduction of labor income inequality in Brazil over this period of time. But when we take into account capital income inequality as well, what the distributional national accounts estimates were showing is rather a stability of top 10% income share. So it's really important to look at all the income sources and all the wealth sources that are not necessarily present in standard sources to track inequality. This is what this project, the World Inequality Database Project, is trying to do. And the main contribution, in fact, is this methodological contribution, which many of you know. And we've tried to summarize this in the Distributional National Accounts Guidelines, a flexible approach to the distribution of national income within countries, which combines all data sources depending on the data sources we have in different countries. There are different methods to follow. We try to follow them in the most systematic manner and transparent manner we can. This also is a cumulative process. The series are constantly improved. We have 27 coordinators and co-directors in the World Inequality Lab working with these 200 researchers over the world, constantly improving, revising, and updating the series. And so it's very much a collaborative enterprise. I won't spend more time talking about the project itself, but this is just a tribute to the different phases of the project. There are many more. Many of you also are in the room. Now, the World Inequality Database today, so we cover basically all countries in the world. So that's the top 1% net personal wealth share, ranging from 14% in countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, up to 55% in South Africa. And so that's the current status of affairs. Now, what I would like to focus on now is really the latest findings from WID World, which you could also find online. Everything has been updated just a few weeks ago. And let's start with national totals. So I was talking about this importance of combining macro and micro estimates. Let's start with the macro side of the story. Total national income in the world, 2023, latest data available in WID World, 103 trillion euros at PPP. Total national wealth, 637 trillion euros PPP. Total national wealth is the sum of net private wealth. So that's everything that is owned by the private sector, financial and non-financial assets, minus their debts. 542 trillion euros PPP, and the other component, net public wealth, whatever is owned by the public sector, net of their debts, 95 trillion euros PPP. So about 620% of national income is owned over the world today. And if we focus on net personal wealth, which is what we're going to distribute to individuals, and the figures that will follow in a few minutes represent about 502% of national income. All right, so If we look at the macro picture, the evolution of the macro picture, and now we're covering old world regions. This is public and private wealth to income ratios across world regions from 1995 to 2003. We see, this continued rise in private wealth to national income ratios. I mentioned the Piketty-Zuckman 2014 paper. The continued trends are very much visible here, extended to other regions from around 300% in 1995 to over 500%, at least in North America, in Europe. So more than 5 to 6 years of private wealth owned in terms expressed in terms of national income of the region. And the other secular term that we are starting to know very well about, but which is represented here systematically across world regions, is the declining public wealth. It was already very low in rich countries. It's getting also lower in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Russia, Central Asia. There are some exceptions to these trends. If you look at China, I won't present it here, but it's increasing. But overall, rising private wealth, declining public wealth. So much declining that in some regions, it's actually below zero. And so in North America, the government has more debts than it owns assets. Might be a way to also understand the current economic situation and disruptions. But now let's focus on the distribution of private wealth and more precisely personal wealth. On the right-hand side of the graph, the top 10% of the world population own 74% of the total. The bottom 50% own just 2% of the total. This is to be contrasted with income inequality. So the top 10% ranked by income own 54% of the total, whereas the bottom 50% own 8%. Divergence between the level of wealth concentration, the level of income concentration, not surprising, but nonetheless quite stark, very strong here in 2023. Now, if we zoom on the global wealth distribution, here is what we have. The average wealth per adult in 2023, 95,000 euros, more or less. And the entry ticket to get in the middle 40% group is about 18,000 euros. To get in the top 10%, multiply this amount by 10. And to get in the global top 1% wealth owners, the entry ticket is at 1.1 million euros. I'll focus in the next few slides more precisely on all these other groups at the very top. The point is going to be that, in fact, there's a lot of movement and action that's happening really among these small groups, which we don't necessarily see so well or not at all when we look at the top 1% or the top 10%. Just a few orders of magnitude here. The top 0.01% starts at 150 million euros. And the top 54 individuals, 21 billion euros in 2023. Before I get to these dynamics at the very, very top of the distribution, let's just look at the changing geography of global wealth inequality. So that's the picture in 1995 for each, so the poorest on the left, the richest on the right. For each bin here, what we show is the percentage of individuals from a given region. This is going up to the top 0.01%. And here, what's really striking, look at the red wedge. So China was not represented at all at the top in 1995. A fair amount of representation now. It's among the world important powers, also among the very, very rich. Now, what I was talking about before, we don't see so much evolution when we look at the big groups, top 10%, middle 40%, bottom 50%. Well, that's what you get. Slight reduction in the top 10% from 78% to 74%. Slight increase in the middle 40%, associated with some of the dynamics just discussed on the rise of China and Chinese middle class. Barely no visible evolution, at least here, for the bottom 50%. But this is also, for the matter, more or less what we see when we look at the top 1%. Little evolution, maybe a slight decline, 37, 38% accruing owned by the top 1% in the late 1990s, around 36% today. So we really want to zoom further into the top 1% to see what's happening. And here we go. So the global top 0.1% own over 5 million euros, from 16% of total wealth to 18% over the period. Now let's zoom a little further. The global top 0.01%, so those who own more than 24 million euros, 540,000 adults in 2023. They owed 8% of the total. Now they own 10% of the world total. The global top 0.001%, those who own over 150 million euros, evolved from 4% to 5.5% of the total. And here they are represented. So these 54,000 adults are represented with the global bottom 50%, 2.7 billion adults with barely any change in their total wealth holdings. And then let's zoom even further a little bit. The global top 100 individuals, 0.7% of global wealth today, up from 0.2 to 0.4% of the total in the late 1990s. So what we really see here is this strong evolution within the top 1%. And that was the global values. But if you look at various regions, here we have Latin America, North America, Europe, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Russia, Central Asia, and South Africa. You know, diversity of dynamics, but still this increasing pattern with flabbergasting increases. For instance, Russia, Central Asia, with this increase from 2% to over 14% of the total for the top 0.01%. So a generalized increase, though at different speeds. Now, as the wealth of the very, very top was increasing as the share of national regional wealth, what we've also discovered and covered over the past years of research is this unequal tax picture. Billionaires pay very little taxes. So this is the average tax rate by income group for billionaires. I'm sure many of you have seen this graph earlier, and this is being discussed and will be further discussed in this conference. In France and the Netherlands, a very stark regressive picture at the very, very top as soon as we include the billionaires in the picture, and more or less a flat tax rate for everybody in the United States. That's the picture today, drawing from research synthesized by the EU Tax Observatory in their latest report. But if we take a longer run perspective, again, as the share of the top was rising, their contribution to taxes was declining, at least when we have evidence here in the US. Average tax rate of the 400 richest Americans from 55% in 1960 to about 45% in 1995 to close to 22% today. And this brings me to the tax simulation tool that we wanted to present and to release on the occasion of this conference. So we felt that something was lacking, and that was a relatively simple tool for anybody to try to check different wealth tax options and check the potential tax revenues of these various options. So the tool is available on this link, world-wealth-tax-simulator. Quite a long address, but if you go to wid.world, you should be able to find it quite easily. And we see it as a first of its kind wealth tax simulator covering all countries, thanks to the body of work that I presented before, ensuring macro consistency based on distributional national accounts and a rich list. The goal is to help citizens understand and participate in wealth tax debates. We wanted to produce a simple tool so no need to be an expert to use it. And it's open source. It's collaborative, so code, data, programs are available online for anyone who would like to improve it, to contribute to the effort. The underlying methodology, in a nutshell, we're basically now have introduced consistency between World Inequality Database Wealth Inequality Series and Rich List, starting with Forbes. In France, we're using challenges rather than Forbes. We're also trying to correct some of these series, for instance, by removing non-residents or splitting largest family holdings, in the case of France, for instance. And we're using this data to correct whatever we used to have on WID World at the top 0.001%. So for those of you who are accustomed to using WID World data, that was the smallest group that we had before. And as I was also trying to show before, even within this group, a lot of action is happening. And this group is not sufficient to properly tell us about billionaires themselves. So what we're doing is using these rich list data, we're trying to provide more information within this group itself. And so we're combining rich list data with general Pareto interpolation to provide additional information of the breakdown within this group. This needs to make a few corrections, but just in a nutshell, what we're doing basically in terms of the global billionaires, before the corrections, we had actually slightly more billionaires. We're having a little less post Forbes correction. That's, bottom line at the world level. That's what you see, from 3,200 to 2,600, more or less. This wealth is not lost, right? It's just shifted to the rest of the top 0.001% of the population. But more importantly, what's key here is that basically we are shifting billionaires away from North America, East Asia, towards Europe, Russia, Central Asia. At least we have billionaires numbers that are closer to what is presented, what is available in Rich List. Again, we're not losing wealth, we're just shifting it to the rest of the top 0.001% when correction needs to be made. So now let's look at the simulator itself. You can pick a region, you can pick a country, a number of tax brackets. You can select values for tax evasion, depreciation. This is left for users to decide what's their preferred rate. Pick a rate, pick a threshold, and here we go. So 2% tax, and let's keep things here as transparent as possible. Zero depreciation, zero tax evasion, the full tax revenue potential of a 2% additional tax on global billionaires. Here, billionaires expressed in US dollars, the revenues in euros. So just let's have this in mind. 175 billion euros revenue potential at the global level. If we look at European billionaires themselves, same tax revenue potential, about 38 billion euros. And if we focus on the centimillionaires, 75 billion euros. So a lot of interest in indeed going beyond billionaires, enlarging to centimillionaires as a group. The case of the 2% wealth tax, minimum wealth tax, was recently discussed in France. So if we think of an additional wealth tax, or if we assume that in the case of a minimum wealth tax, no tax at all was paid by the French centimillionaires, the additional revenues, the full potential is 18 billion euros, which is consistent with some of the earlier estimates that were discussed in the past weeks in France, if you were here following these debates in particular at the Parliament. That's for India, and I'm not going to do all the countries. The tool is out there, and we're happy to have any feedback if you have some. So, of course, there are some areas for improvement here. We're relying on Forbes data. Forbes, has an overfocus on business assets. There's an issue of, the size of the tax units in Forbes. We're trying to correct this in some cases, but we're not doing it for all countries. There's something that can be improved in the future. And behavioral responses, at the moment, it's entirely left to users to pick up some form of evasion rate. This is also something that can be included later on. And so, talking about evasion or responses, let me conclude with a few reflections on billionaire taxation. And the point here is basically to start with some of the key reactions that we might hear when it comes to billionaire taxation. These are not all the reactions, just a subset of them, but I will try to look at them one by one. And maybe the first one is, well, actually, why should we care about taxing billionaires? There isn't enough wealth at the top. And well, looking at that, based on what I've just discussed, I think if there's one outcome of the body of work that I referred to is precisely to show the amount of wealth that there is within these top groups. And it looks like the work that was done collectively by many of those in this room over the past decade really, made possible to reach some form of consensus on this matter. Even among colleagues or persons outside academia that were not aware or that didn't agree at all with this statement a few years back. But as soon as this has been cleared, the immediate second reaction is, well, actually, fair enough, there's quite a bit of wealth up there, but if we start to do so, in fact, the economy, if we start to tax, in fact, the economy will suffer. They will leave, and the economy will be impacted. So that brings us to the general theme and discussions of this conference, but just maybe here in a nutshell, the wealth impacts on tax activity with the evidence we have at the moment, well, this suggests a very large disproportion between the actual behavioral responses and the actual importance of these discussions in public debates. Jacobson and co-authors, Sweden and Denmark, look at tax-induced migration. They find it's relatively modest. A 1 percentage point increase in top wealth tax leads to a reduction in the stock of billionaires of less than 2% in the long run. A reduction of 0.05% of aggregate investment, very marginal effect here, 0.13% reduction of long-run GDP, so very small effects here for Sweden, Denmark. Back and co-authors looking at France 2017-2018 reforms on capital taxation. So that's the opposite kind of reform. You reduce capital income taxation. Is there a reduction in the departure rate? Yes, but barely visible. Reduction of 0.02 point for a 1 point reduction in corporate taxation. Effect on economic activity, question mark? Well, maybe yes. Yes, there is. Plus 0.01%. Very hard to actually materialize this effect. The additional point is that, so beside this gap, this disproportion between the perceived size of these effects and their actual size, none of these effects are actually set in stone. There are many policy options to mitigate them. And another very important thing is how the revenues themselves are spent. So to summarize, it's important to look at what's happening to the margins, but we should never forget about the core of what is happening. And maybe yet another reaction is, well, taxing billionaires actually is in fact not sufficient to address inequality. And reaction may be coming from the other side of the aisle. I won't spend so much time here just saying that, well, no, it's not sufficient. It doesn't mean that is not a key part of the answer to address inequality and to fix the regressivity of tax system. But of course, needs to be embedded in a much broader set of policies related to financial deregulation, to training, to globalization and trade flows, as well as policies that connect what we've seen earlier related to the decline in public wealth and the rise in private wealth. And so here as well, it's a tribute to some interdisciplinary setup to look at these issues and to better understand, to properly understand how to address inequality at the very top of the very top. And let me conclude with this. If we've cleared the earlier evoked reactions, we might be left with this kind of statement. We cannot trust the data anyway. And this reaction might go as follows. Well, in fact, there's one paper that shows that inequality might not be rising as it's said in the US. There are dozens and dozens of papers showing the opposite, but maybe inequality is not rising in the US. I'm being a little bit caricatural, but in fact, 2019, that's The Economist, November 2019, Inequality Illusions, looking at legitimate discussions, debates among researchers, among inequality researchers, but transforming that in an argument that basically questions the entire body of work on inequality and on the regressivity of tax systems. As Gabriel Zuckman wittingly showed at the time, the back cover of the same magazine was this $40,000 watch ad for Patek Philippe. So who is this talking to? Serving whom? Borrowing to Emmanuel says Gabriel Zuckman 2020 paper, there are no raw facts in the social sciences. Rather, there are attempts at describing reality through more or less elaborate statistical frameworks. I think this kind of conference is an excellent response to potential reactions to inequality illusions, serious discussions about how to measure, about how to seriously address potential issues associated with wealth tax and how to move forward. So let me conclude here. How to move from the billionaire age to the age of billionaire taxation. Well, tribute to this large international research effort mapping wealth inequality across countries and over times. This was an effort rooted in society, aiming at facilitating public discussion rather than closing it. Collaborations also with investigative consortiums, administrations, and various stakeholders. And this work has shown that there has been a booming concentration of wealth at the very top. And therefore, taxing billionaires stands as a key tool to fix tax progressivity, restore trust in the economy. And by the way, the large revenue potential suggests that it can also be critical to address other very many pressing challenges of our times: climate, education, health, and many others. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Luca. So I think we have about 5 to 10 minutes left for questions. So are there any questions in the room? And if you can, so we have one over there. And if you can maybe stand up, if you don't mind, and maybe introduce yourself, that would also help with the networking in the next few days. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Shin. I work in Germany on the online bank, data analyst, big fan of Piketty. Bunch of millionaire friends, not friends, colleagues walking around my office. So I wanted to distribute the idea of, the capital and the ideology, those books. And then they said basically, like similar to the question what you listed, the counter argument saying your data, Piketty's data is skewed. And I was like, let me check because I'm an analyst. But the data you're providing on the website you provided us, it's too granular, and then I couldn't really do the deep dive. So basically, my question is like, are you planning to produce more granular data? And then if so, how much granular can you go to not to hit the GDPR compliance?
Thanks. So I'll answer. Maybe we take a few questions in a row. Yeah.
So there is one question, two questions there, and I think we'll take two at the same time because we only have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. Thank you for the conference, for the presentation. I'm Isabelle. I work for Climate Action Network Europe, Can Europe. And I had a question on the tool because I saw that it's possible to select Europe and Switzerland. I mean, there are a few non-EU countries in the individual countries. I was wondering whether at some stage it would be possible to put European Union. That would be tremendously helpful for our work at EU level.
Good afternoon. Supriyo Day from the International Monetary Fund. Of course, another admirer of Professor Piketty's work goes unsaid. I just wanted to ask two sort of unrelated issues. One is, are we taking into account how public expenditures impact this, especially redistributive public expenditures? That's one question. Secondly, just a thought is that how much of this is driven by, I mean, there's a tax effect, but how much of it is on the way government sometimes allocates resources, for example, large public infrastructure projects afterwards in sort of goes to private sector, large airports, and also other kinds of monopolistic power exercised by different very rich people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall I maybe a last one and
So he'll take a last question
yeah.
and answer all of them together. So that's the last one.
Thank you very much. Giovanni Occhiali, International Center for Tax and Development. Just a quick curiosity, how would you compare the quality of rich list across different parts of the world, and especially below the billion level threshold?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the comments and questions. So GDPR, I don't think we run any risk at this stage with the kind of data that, the more granular data that we are releasing. In fact, essentially what we're doing is, based on what I've just presented, is nothing more than information that is already public out there, and that you can obtain from some rich list data, some of which is actually available already online and open access. So at this stage, basically the very raw data sets, and many of our colleagues are working on them, well, these are very much GDPR sensitive, and we're not releasing this at all. But the type of distributions that we have, so those who are familiar with them, so 127 groups, that's the standard typical number of groups you get on WID World. There's no actual issue here. And the additional information, if you go check out the simulator, we're basically just telling you what's the number of billionaires or centimillionaires in a given country based on information that is also available publicly in many cases. This connects with the rich list question, how good it is. Well, actually, I think it's a very good point. Rich lists, you know, they are very much often referred to in many discussions. They might not be so good, in fact, in many countries. So in some cases, in fact, WID World data we think is better. And so basically when we have, in some cases, rich lists are not used to correct. Basically, the rich lists show less billionaires that we have on WID World. In those cases, no change. And so then you need to see country by country. But if you look at the case of France, for instance, there's a huge difference between whatever you see from the Forbes list and whatever you see from the challenge list. And And this would take us, a much longer discussion. I see it's already 3, so very rapidly, public to private. The question of is how redistribution is taken into account in this data on WID World. You can have a look at post-tax inequality series. So that's also a strong evolution, I think, from my perspective, an improvement over the past few years. Now we have global, for each country we have post-tax inequality series. And on the role of public investments may be captured by private interest. I don't know if this is what you had in mind. Well, of course, this is definitely going to show up in some of the wealth trajectories that we observe in some regions or in some countries, CF, Russia, Central Asia, to name but one, for instance. And I think I should end here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca.